So you see a picture there. One of my very good friends growing up was named Michael. And sadly, he died in the summer of 2012 at the age of 45 after a battle with brain cancer. Some of you will maybe remember me speaking of him, asking for prayers for him back at that time. This is one of the last pictures I have of him from when we visited them just about a month before he passed away. But I want to talk a little bit about, remember a little bit about Michael. So I've got some pictures I'll just throw into the story randomly here and there. But the time I'm thinking about is not this time. It's going way, way back, much earlier, back to the time when we were in elementary school together. And this is kind of a small picture and an old picture. But this was I don't know if this is my birthday party in grade 4 or grade 5 or something like that, but that's me, ready to cash in on all the goods. And this is my friend Michael and some other friends that were there. So that's what we looked like way back in the day. I met him in the beginning of grade 4, and we remained friends for decades. So the time I'm thinking about, I don't remember exactly when it was. I don't remember exactly what year it was. I think it was probably about when we were maybe in grade 6. Michael was going to come and spend the weekend at my house because his parents were going to be away for a couple of days. And so, we were excited about that. We thought it was pretty cool. We were anticipating having a lot of fun together, having kind of a sleepover, This is when we visited Michael a couple of years before he passed away down in Kansas. This is the only time in our adult life where I had more hair than him because he had just finished some chemotherapy. So that's his wife and kids, and my wife and kids. So Michael was coming to my house. So on Friday after school, instead of walking to my home, I walked with him to his home. We were there in Oshawa. His home was on the campus of Kingsway College. So we got to his home. His home was a bi-level. We walked in, walked down the stairs. To the right, down the hallway, was his bedroom. And he commenced packing. For most of us, I think if we were going somewhere for a weekend, probably you would need what? Maybe one suitcase at the most? But for Michael, it was a different thing. It was only about a 15-minute walk between our houses, so it wasn't like they were going a long distance. But if there was one thing that you could never accuse Mike of, and that was underpacking. So he went to his storage room, which was right at the bottom of the stairs, and somewhere from in there, he dragged out two of the hugest suitcases that I had at that point in my life ever seen in my life. We had nothing like that in our home. I didn't know they made suitcases that big. He brought them down the hallway, got out all of his stuff, and he started packing those two huge suitcases. I don't think they'd even be allowed on planes. But he found that he couldn't quite get in them everything that he planned to take for that trip. So he went back to their laundry room and he got out a third, what I would call just a regularly large, big, like as big as we had in our home suitcase. And he filled that one up, and he still had some more stuff that he was planning to bring. But he decided, it was just one weekend, so he just went with those 3 suitcases. And this was the beginning of the year of 2012 before he passed away. The family picture, one of the last family pictures they sent out. So Michael was packing. This guy, he packed more clothes than I even owned, literally. And he packed if you can think about it, he had it. He was bringing it to my house for that weekend. Just any conceivable thing, he had it packed. Like I said, his bedroom was down in the basement, so he had these 3 very full suitcases, so we had to heave them down the hallway, and then worse, we had to heave them up the stairs to the front door so that we could ultimately take them out to their car so that his mom could drive us then over to my house. And this is just our last visit with them in Kansas, just about a month before he passed away. So these are important pictures to me. So anyways, we had the suitcases there up at the door, and we were just taking a break and resting our backs. And at that point, his mom came from somewhere upstairs to the front door. And when she saw these 3 suitcases, she pretty well had almost a coronary attack right on the spot. And what followed was, let me just say, it was a very verbal and passionate discussion, punctuated with much emphasis. And the result of that, they didn't call in an arbitrator, but it was getting close. The result of that, when all of the dust settled from that negotiation process, was that I guess Mike lost. And so the deal they negotiated was that Michael was only allowed to bring one huge suitcase and the one big suitcase. That was all he was allowed to bring on this weekend. So you know what that means? That means we had to heave those things all the way back down to his room. And he didn't just leave one there. He unpacked everything out of all 3 suitcases, and he started all over again, grumbling the whole time about the indignity of the situation and how is he supposed to survive for a weekend at my house if he couldn't bring his stuff. And so he limited himself to the 2 suitcases, came to my house, and as I recall, I think we had a pretty good weekend. I think we were okay. We weren't missing anything. In fact, we spent most of Sunday at his house, which was somewhat problematic because all of his stuff was at my house. So I'm not really sure what we did there, but I think we had fun. Now this wasn't just a childhood quality that Mike had. This is a picture I've showed you before. This is from grade 11 in our class, and I'm moving more to this time now. This is a picture that kind of actually is starting to haunt me a little bit. There's some people like Trudy, that's your sister. Recognize her? And Alden, that's your cousin. Recognize him? You don't look convinced. It is. That's Mark. And that's Mr. Stefan Brueggemann, for those of you who are at Crawford. And that's me. And that's my friend Bob, and my really good friend Michael, and my really good friend Mark. And you know what? All 3 of these guys passed away in their 40s, in that order. And just this year, I participated in a memorial service for Mark. So I'm reminded when I look at that picture that life is uncertain, isn't it? And I look back at that and I say, wow, life is a blessing. And it's uncertain. And if you're young, take enjoyment and take careful thought about your life while you have it. But anyways, that's not the point, but just as I look at that picture and as the years go by, I start to say, what is going on? Anyways, I want to fast forward to a little bit past this time, to grade 12. Our class was going to Algonquin Park for a class camping weekend. And so we had Kingsway had those Greyhound-type buses. And, they have those, the highway buses have those big underneath storage bays. Basically what happened was the whole class packed all of their gear in one of the bays, and we left the other one for Mike, because everybody knew what Mike was like. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but not as much as you might think. We got up there at Algonquin Park. The way it worked was we set up our tents. Basically, everybody was 2 or 3 people in a tent, except for one person. Can you guess who? That would be Michael. He had a tent all to himself. In fact, he pitched his tent off by himself. And he didn't join in our communal big fire. He had his own little fire that he did. And he actually somehow figured out a way to chop down a tree so that it fell across his fire so that he would have a constant source of wood for his fire. And he got in all kinds of trouble with the camp ranger because of that. That was Michael. But he had a 3-person tent. And poor Mike, I almost felt sorry for him. If you looked in his tent, he barely had any space to lie down in there. I mean, he literally had this little narrow strip at one edge of the tent, and right beside that narrow strip was like a steeply inclined mountain of stuff. Stuff, just full of that tent. And I expected every morning, I thought, I'm probably going to have to go dig Mike out of the avalanche, because he might have been buried last night, and he won't be able to move under there. That was Michael. He packed a lot. So you might be wondering why I'm telling you about my friend Mike. Well, I find that I kind of remember him. I think of some of those stories when I read Christ's instructions to his disciples, which are recorded in the book of Mark. Do you remember these instructions? They were instructions that Jesus gave when he sent his disciples out to preach. And I got thinking about that one time, and I thought, man, if Michael had been one of those disciples at that time, I don't know how he would have dealt with that. I think he would have experienced some severe crisis when he heard the limited instructions that Jesus gave. So let's take a look at them. If you've got a Bible available, it's in the Gospel of Mark, 2nd book of the New Testament, Gospel of Mark, chapter 6. and verses 7 through 9. Mark chapter 6, verses 7 through 9. So the disciples had spent some time with Jesus now. They had been traveling around with him. They were up in Galilee. But now maybe something unexpected happened. Mark chapter 6, beginning at verse 7, speaking of Jesus, it says, "And he called the 12," that's the 12 disciples, "to him, and began to send them out 2 by 2, and gave them power over unclean spirits. He commanded them to take nothing for the journey except a staff, no bag, no bread, no copper in their money belts, but to wear sandals, and to put on, and not to put on 2 tunics." Now, if you look in the other gospel records, the instructions are phrased a little bit differently there in the complementary accounts in Matthew chapter 10 and Luke chapter 9. And at first you can read them and say, well, these don't match. But if you really look at it, there's really nothing seriously different to worry about. They are complementary accounts. But for today, I would like to primarily work from Mark's telling of this story, of this record. Mark's version seems to clarify, I think, a realistic overview of this that allowed them to take a staff and sandals. I think it was a good picture of what happened. So the question is, you read this and you say, well, why were there these restrictions? How come Jesus gave instructions like that? And the scholars generally feel that the reason for these restrictions was that Jesus didn't want the disciples to spend or perhaps waste a bunch of time in preparation for their journeys. The main preparation that they needed for what they were being called to do was the experience they had already been having of watching and learning from Christ. And along with that, the power that it says he gave them just before he sent them off. The Lord didn't want the disciples worrying about all the physical preparations that would usually be considered if you were going to take a journey. He wanted them to concentrate on what they were going to preach, not so much on what they needed to pack. They weren't supposed to dress like some kind of a traveler or some kind of religious teacher. Rather, Jesus was saying, just be as you are. Just look like the common people. And that way, in the minds of both the audience and the speaker, it would be the message rather than their appearance, which would be the focus. So they were just to be normal, dress like the common people, be one among them. And the idea is that would make their labors more effective. And yet you have to think that, there would be a little bit of an irony here. So these disciples, they would be just dressed like an everyday common person, and yet as they would go around, as they would enter into a town or a village, especially if it wasn't too big a place, the people of those towns and places they visited would recognize that there was something unusual about these disciples when they came into town. They'd be wearing their sandals, all dusty and dirty, carrying their staffs. They would kind of look like people that were traveling. And likely nobody, or at least very few people in those towns would know who they were. So they would know, hey, we don't know who these guys are. They're strangers to us. And yet they would be lacking the usual things that a traveler would have: money, and luggage, and food. And so their appearance would reveal that they were men who had a reliance upon something other than the normal things of this world. As they preached about faith, the people would be able to see that they truly lived in faith. Now, it's important for us today, as we read this, to note that these stipulations were later repealed by Christ. And maybe we should go back and look at that. Go to Luke 22, verses 35 and 36. Because we have to be careful not to just grab something in isolation and somehow apply it for all time eternally. We need to understand it in its context. So go to Luke 22, verse 35 and 36. This is a little bit later in the story. This is after they had gone out and come back. And Jesus gave some more long-term instructions. Luke 22, verse 35. It says, "And he," Jesus, "said to them," the disciples, "When I sent you without money bag, sack, and sandals, did you lack anything?" So they said, "Nothing." Then he, Jesus, said to them, the disciples, "But now he who has a money bag, let him take it, and likewise a sack. And he who has no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one." So these instructions that we read in the Gospel of Mark, they weren't intended to be literally applied by Christ's followers for all time. So you can't take that text and say, you know what, a Christian should never ever carry money because Jesus said don't take any money with you. A Christian should never pack a lunch because that's not what it was about. We need to understand it in its context. For this first short journey, they needed to develop a base of trust in Christ by not having the usual things that a traveler would have. They took nothing. Man, they were forced to have faith, right? When you've got nothing, you all of a sudden can exercise a whole lot more faith. Can you imagine this? Can you imagine going on a journey, not packing a suitcase, not taking any cash, any debit cards, any credit cards, nothing with a chip in it? And then since you wouldn't be able to buy any food, not even taking a lunch, can you imagine doing that? And if you try to imagine that and think of what it would be like, then perhaps we get a little better idea of the amount of faith that you would need. No bag, no bread, no copper. It's like taking no Samsonite, no picnic basket, no MasterCard. And that's how Christ sent them out. You see, Christ wasn't sending them out on a vacation, but it's important to note he also wasn't sending them out empty. He sent them with something very important. What does it say? He sent them with what? Power. Thank you. My wife's always at my side. Got my back. Sent them with power. This first journey was to be a short one. He wasn't sending them out for months and months and months. It was just a short journey, and a lot of luggage would have probably just slowed them down. Probably it would have hindered their progress. In fact, it's kind of interesting to note that the English word impediment, at one time back in history, you know what it meant? The word impediment actually meant baggage. That's what the word impediment meant. And you can kind of see how that would sort of fit with this situation here. It would apply. So we look at this passage and we see that Jesus had very specific reasons for giving the specific instructions he did to his disciples at this specific time. Now, although as we read before, these exact rules or guidelines were later rescinded, when I look at this passage, I believe that we can still draw from them some principles which do remain valid for us today as disciples of Jesus Christ. So let's picture an elder in a local church. And let's say this elder decides, in his process of spiritual walk with Christ, process of prayer and devotions, he feels impressed. He senses God's leading. He has a growing conviction that God is calling him to conduct a seminar on understanding Bible prophecy. He more and more just has a sense that this is what God is calling him to do. And so naturally, he would experience a mixture of feelings. He's going to be excited and enthusiastic and energetic about that, probably a little bit apprehensive as well, but he's come to the point where he knows this is what he needs to do. He's going to do it. He's ready to go. So after proposing the idea to his church, he finds out that the budget has already been set, and the budget doesn't have room to accommodate the expenses of holding this seminar. But that's okay. He's so into it now, he's so ready to go that it's something he wants to do. He's willing to cover the costs himself. And so now the process of preparation begins. So first, he needs to purchase and assemble his materials. He needs to develop and refine his presentations. He needs to determine all the things like what kind of handouts is he going to give to his participants. And then he has to find a suitable location to hold the seminar because he wants a place that will be, non-threatening and neutral. People can feel comfortable to attend. But he starts looking for places, and it just seems like every place doesn't quite work right. He finds one place, but it's really in kind of a rough part of town. People might be even scared to come there. That's not going to work so good. He finds another place that's just wonderful, but it's way too expensive, way out of his budget. And then he finds another place, it's a good location, it's a good price, and he goes to book it, but unfortunately it's already booked up during all the time when he needs to be able to do his seminar. And then the elder realizes, he gets thinking he really should get a new suit. Because he has noticed that all of the men who are administrators and departmental directors from the conference, when they come and do presentations, he notices that they tend to wear sort of a darker colored suit than he usually wears. So he gets thinking about that and concludes that, perhaps if he got a darker suit, that would give him a little more bearing of authority as he's presenting. And then he thinks that maybe he should, hold off and take some time to raise the extra money for the nicer location. But now he's got to buy this suit, and he's only got so much money, and if that isn't enough, he's finding it difficult to get enough volunteers to be able to help him out with this seminar because he can't do it all by himself. And he's got a bunch of people who, oh yeah, they're willing to help, but he can't get enough of them together at the same time to be able to make it work out. And on top of that, he wants to send out some advertising flyers because he wants to make sure that he has an audience. And he knows that in today's world, I mean, there's so much stuff to catch your attention. He needs some outstanding, really extraordinary flyers to catch people's attention. But how's he going to do this? He's got to buy the new suit, and he's got to pay for the extra cost of renting the nice hall, and that means he can't afford the printing costs of really nice flyers. And then to add insult to injury, it turns out that there's going to be a delay in when he can even get the seminar materials because the supplier is understocked, and then it's got to cross the border and go through all that brokerage stuff, and then he hears that Canada Post is thinking about yet another postal strike, and that means who knows when he'll get it. And by this time, the church is ready to launch a major community services outreach. And so people in the church are being encouraged to give their time and their attention and their energy to that initiative. And oh man, all this stuff is going on, and before you know it, the poor elder ends up with an ulcer from all the stress of worrying about the success of the seminar, because guess what? Now the church has reconsidered and they said, you know what, we'll pay for it, but I hope it's going to be good. It better have some results if we're going to put all this money into it. So now he's thinking, oh no, what if there isn't results? And it's starting to take a toll on him. And then the elder finds out that one of the conference leaders has gone and planned to conduct a prophecy seminar in the very next community over from where he's going to do his, of all places. And so now he's kind of got like some competition, and wouldn't you know it, the pastor, it turns out, is going to be off on vacation when he rescheduled his seminar to be. So the pastor's not even going to be there to give some guidance and support. And a year later, the dear brother doesn't want to even hear anybody ever say the words prophecy seminar in his presence, because those words just leave him shaking and shuddering. Are you tired? I'm tired. It's a bit of an exaggeration, right? Hopefully. And please don't misunderstand what I'm trying to say with that. I am not saying that careful planning isn't needed for our church outreach and witnessing programs. It is. And I am not suggesting that we shouldn't strive to do things in a professional manner, that we shouldn't try to do things in a way that will provide the greatest amount of appeal for people. But the point I'm trying to make from this passage that we're looking at today is this. You know what? The devil does not want to see progress being made in the work of spreading the gospel, the good news about God's love and truth. That's it. And that means that nasty old Satan will throw as many roadblocks and problems in our way as possible. He's been practicing that for a long time. And note this, Satan doesn't mind you planning to do God's work as long as you keep on perpetually planning and you never actually get to the doing part. Plan for the rest of eternity as long as you don't do anything. That's his perspective. And I think the reality is for us as Christians sometimes in a chaotic world, sometimes it's easy for us to get looking at all of the roadblocks, all of the problems, all the stuff that gets thrown up and trying to figure out, how can we do a detour around those and how can we, remove that roadblock? And perhaps there is a point where what we really need to do is just say, Lord, take me through. And just drive through them. Just get on with it. And there has to be balance to this. Blind, reckless presumption is not going to net any benefit. It's not just like, I'm just going to do something. I don't care what's happening. I refuse to use any brain cells. I'm just going to go ahead. It's not like that. But there is a balance, right? Sometimes we can be immobilized by all of the problems or potential problems. Sooner or later, we just have to move forward if we're going to help extend God's kingdom. And so I would like to suggest that given the reality of where and when we exist, smack dab in the middle of the great battle between good and evil here on planet Earth, let me suggest that it will be a rare time when the situation and the circumstances and the conditions will be probably absolutely perfect for witnessing for God. Because we don't live in a perfect world. The Lord provides wonderful opportunities to represent Him, but if you look hard enough maybe, quite possibly we could always find at least some little aspect of things that isn't totally ideal. In fact, Satan will do everything in his power to make sure of it. So if you're going to wait until you achieve the utopia environment for witnessing, most likely you'll never witness. That's our reality. We witness in a sinful world. So imagine a hypothetical scene for illustrative purposes. You're sitting there on a park bench. Should we make it summertime? You're sitting there, yes, please. You're sitting there on a park bench in the summertime. You don't even have a coat on. And an individual comes and sits down on the bench beside you. And let's just say that you just have this strong impression that God's Spirit is working on that person's heart and mind. Maybe nothing like that has ever happened before, but you just have this sense that, maybe God is doing something in this person's life, and you just kind of feel impressed that you should speak to the person. Maybe in starting a conversation, you could find an opportunity to share God's love. And so you're going to do it. You're like, should I do this? Yeah, I should do this. So you're about to open your mouth. You're about to do something, but then as you're about to initiate a conversation, maybe just in time, out of the corner of your eye, you notice a little flower bed close by to where you're sitting. And horror of horrors, as you give your attention to that flower bed, you notice the results of sin. You see that some of the flowers which are made to thrive and look beautiful, they have wilted. Some of them are even dead. Well, this won't do. Having God's second book, nature, in such a state, how can you witness in such a setting as that, where nature isn't supporting the beauty of God's grandeur? And so you jump up and you run to your car and you drive to the nearest garden center and you buy some really nice vibrant flowers and you drive home and you change into your gardening work clothes and you gather some of your garden tools. You drive back to the park and you dig out all of those dead flowers. You get rid of them where nobody's ever going to see them, and you plant new, fresh, lovely flowers, and you drive back home and you get showered and you change and you look up a couple of Bible texts, and then you drive back to the park. And now you're ready and you expectantly walk at a brisk pace back to the bench so that you can have the opportunity. In fact, you're looking forward to expecting God's blessings as you witness to your benchmate. And what's going to happen? Most likely, the bench is empty, or maybe someone else is there. The person is long gone. And you say, well, Lord, I don't know. I was gonna tell someone about you. I was gonna do something there, but how can I witness for you when your nature is dead? That doesn't match very well. And, right in plain sight like that, I just couldn't do it, God. Is that kind of stretched a bit? Maybe. But do we maybe do that? Maybe in a little more subtle ways? Do we maybe find ourselves finding a whole bunch of reasons to justify not representing our Lord in situations we find ourselves in? Do you think that could happen? Isn't it true that sometimes we can over-prepare? Sometimes in the church, we can get so bogged down with so much equipment and technology and paraphernalia that we can get so distracted that we lose sight of the main purpose, which is the message of good news that we are blessed to share. And technology, equipment, printed electronic materials, those are not bad or evil things. In fact, they can be wonderful and useful tools as long as we keep our focus on the message that we have to share. As long as we allow those tools to enhance the spreading of the message, not end up taking the place of the message. And so if waiting for the perfect equipment or technology is going to mean a big delay in being able to present the message, then I would like to suggest for our consideration to us that it would be better to present the message with what we have than to never present the message because of what we don't yet have. And on a personal level, isn't it true that sometimes we don't feel properly prepared to serve as a witness for God? Isn't that true? It is true, because that's what we said. That's as a congregation when we said, how come we don't do this more? How come we don't get out in the community? How come we don't do some of the stuff we want to do? And you know what a majority of us said? Well, I'd like to, but I don't know what to do. I don't feel ready. I'm kind of scared. I'm not really sure what to do. I don't really know how to do it. I'm not prepared. Nobody taught me. I'm untrained. That's what we said. It's real. That's why we've been doing DOT programs for a long time, to encourage us to just walk across the room and make a connection with someone, to encourage us to think about what is my giftedness from God. How can I fit into the picture? How can I use the gifts and the passions God has given me to be able to help extend God's kingdom, to connect with other people? How to be a good Samaritan. how to look at some of the needs and be intentional about addressing those needs. That's why we do that. Because sometimes we're uncertain. Sometimes we think, we got to have it all down, we got to drill and practice. You do not have to have a set of 24 evangelistic sermons written, prepared, memorized before you can witness. Some of the most effective witness often is just one-on-one with our friends. That's really where representing Christ starts. That's the foundation of it. We can be an example of living right. We can show Christian love to our neighbors. We can look and pray for opportunities to share God's love and grace, just to show that we care about people's everyday ups and downs, problems and joys. Those are the things that help us be encouraged to keep on living life as witnesses for Christ on a personal basis. Those are the things that better prepare us for witnessing on even a larger scale. You know what? Jesus didn't call together his disciples and say, okay, guys, here it is. Here's the deal. I'm going to put you guys in groups of 2, and I want you to go out and preach, but this is how it's going to work. I'm giving you 2 weeks. You've got 2 weeks to get busy, 2 weeks to organize a program, take care of planning all of the details, practice your presentations. I want you to draw up a proposal for what you're going to do. 2 weeks' time, I'm going to meet with you again. I want you to submit your plans to me. I'm going to take a look at them. You can sort of do an audition presentation in front of me, and if you're good enough, you know what? I'm going to send you out with my blessing. Is that what Jesus said? Thankfully, no. Thankfully, no. I don't know the disciples, right? I hope to meet all of them that are in heaven when the time comes. But I expect that probably at least some of those disciples weren't totally relaxed and comfortable with the idea of being sent out to preach. Because most of them hadn't done that before. I think it's one thing when you're with Jesus, right? You're helping out Jesus, he's preaching, teaching, that's pretty good. But to be sent out on their own? And yet Christ promised that he would be with them. He promised and he gave them power, and he told them to go. And likewise for us as disciples of Christ today, he is also telling us, his current disciples, to go. And many of us just often don't feel that we're quite ready. I think about those disciples, the difference from doing it with Jesus right there and being sent out. That was completely different. But notice what Jesus did. He sent them out in 2s. I think that's a valuable principle. You don't have to go about life as a witness solo. You can go with someone else. Get active with someone who is more experienced, or maybe even team up with someone else who is unsure like yourself. It's a lot easier to do most things with someone else. Whether it goes well or not so well, it's just a lot better with someone else. And so Christ is calling us. In fact, he's telling us to go. That means we need, if we are disciples of Christ, to go out into life and be good examples. Go out and share joy, the joy and peace of our relationship with God, with our friends and our neighbors and our colleagues and our classmates. And, maybe it's go out and hold seminars or assist with outreach endeavors. Just go out and love our neighbors. And so back in Mark 6, the Lord told the disciples what to take and what not to take. And today we might say, well, what about us? What do we take? Because this afternoon, I hope that you are planning to come to Downsview Church as the 19 churches in this area, Adventist churches, gather together to launch a specific, intentional year of evangelistic outreach. We're saying, let's get together with the other churches in the GTA, and let's try to reach out. Because you know what? There's a lot of people that live in Toronto. Have you noticed? There's quite a few. We're saying, let's try to join together our efforts so that we can work in a coordinated way to try to share the good news with the communities around us. So we might ask, what do we go with if God's calling us to go? What do we take? Well, in Mark 6:8, Christ tells the disciples what not to take, but notice that he also tells them something. He says to them to take the staff. And I was thinking about that. What about for us today? Jesus gave these instructions, but what can we take from it today? And I was thinking about that. If we could remember that, if we could remember to take the staff. Can you remember that? Encouraging. Can you remember that? Think you can remember that by next week? Do you think you could remember that a month from now? Take the what? Take the staff. Do you know how to spell staff? It's not too, for some people English is not easy, but I put it there, S-T-A-F-F. Thankfully, it's not a 14-syllable word. Staff. And I was thinking, if we could kind of put that as a mental picture in our mind to take the staff, then we could maybe let each letter represent something to take with us as we go about living our lives as a witness for Christ. So I want to leave you with this, the idea of take the staff. Let the S represent the Spirit. There it is. Jesus promised that we would have the Comforter with us to guide us. So as you go through your life as a witness, make sure you don't go and forget God. Let the Holy Spirit lead you. Let the Holy Spirit open up opportunities for you. And don't get bogged down with so much baggage and stuff going on that you can't keep up. Take the Spirit. We're ready for T. Isn't that encouraging? Look how quick we were done one letter. For T, I would say take the truth. The truth is the good news. The truth is the gospel message, frankly, that Jesus lived and died for us, that Jesus rose again for us, victorious, a conqueror over sin. That's the good news. Give people the truth, something that they can believe for sure, something that you can feel confident to share with them. You're not swindling them. You're not deceiving them. You're giving them something useful. Take the truth. For A, I want A to stand for acceptance. How can people accept the truth from you if you don't accept them? And really, how can you adequately share the truth with someone that you can't accept? You know what? Accepting people doesn't mean that you agree or approve of all that they do and believe. Because that's kind of weird. If you agree with everything that everybody does, you might want to think. But you don't have to agree to accept someone. Acceptance means that you credit them with being a part of God's loved creation. That's what acceptance means. Just as Christ, when he was here on earth, he accepted everyone where they were. It doesn't mean he agreed or condoned what they did, but he accepted them. We need acceptance built into the staffs that we take along on our life's journey. Accept that people will have struggles. That's part of the deal. Take acceptance. For the first F, putting fellowship. Beyond the acceptance of people, we ultimately need fellowship with them. That's not always easy, When you have a different lifestyle, it's so different from the world. Sometimes fellowship is a little bit strained. Sometimes it's a little bit challenging. But we need to ultimately learn to find proper ways to fellowship with those with whom we share the gospel. We need to find a way to laugh with them, love them in practical ways, and just share in the ups and downs of their life. We need to have fellowship with them. Take fellowship. Finally, for the last F, I want to say it must all be done with faith. We need faith that the gospel seeds we try to sow will grow. Maybe not every single seed, but at least some of them will grow. At least one of them will grow. We need to have faith that the Spirit will prepare and work on the hearts of those we connect with. We need to have faith that the truth that we share will be understood. Faith that our acceptance of people will lead, at least in some cases, to fellowship. And faith that that fellowship ultimately will extend beyond just a connection with you and me, but ultimately a connection with God and His family, the church. It takes a lot of faith. We can't dare go without faith. So we need to take the staff, the Spirit, the truth, acceptance, fellowship, and faith. Can you remember to take the staff? Can you remember what it stands for? You don't have to commit, that's pushing it, but say it a few times. The Spirit, the truth, acceptance, fellowship, and faith. They're the qualities our staffs need to be made out of, and they're interrelated parts. Without one element, your staff, you cut a part out of your staff, you're suddenly bent over. Build yourself a witnessing staff with the Spirit, the truth. Go ahead and say it with me. The Spirit, the truth, acceptance, fellowship, and faith. That's not too hard to remember. No element alone is nearly as valuable as they are when they are in combination together. And so in the context of faith, let the Spirit guide you in showing acceptance toward people so that you can build a bridge of fellowship with them. And then once that relationship is formed, the door well may be opened at least a little bit to in due time present them with the truth. That's the process. So in closing, amen to that. In closing, I'd like us to read again some words that are familiar if you're a Christian. If you're not a Christian, they may not be. And if you're not a Christian and you're here, I'm glad you are. But if you are a Christian, you should know these words. It'd help if I tell you where they are. At the end of Matthew, very last two verses of Matthew 28, 19, and 20. A lot of you know this from memory. But I want us to be reminded of that. Matthew 28:19 and 20, Jesus said to his disciples then, his disciples now, "Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you." And here's the promise, "And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." Amen. Guess what, friends? Christ has called us. And he said, you know what, I want you to share the goodness of my love and the joy that it brings you with others, with your friends, your relatives, your neighbors, with anyone you meet, really. And I want to do what Christ wants. Do you? Do you? I hope you do. Today I'm encouraging and challenging us to intentionally renew our decisions to answer Christ's call and go out with the gospel. We need to be careful not to overpack, not to become so involved in preparation and planning we never actually get going. Let's take up our life witnessing staff, made of the Spirit, the truth, acceptance, fellowship, and faith. Let's go forward with God's blessings and encouragement. Let's be glad that he approves of us as witnesses. Imagine that. And let's pray and look for ways to show and tell others the wonderful story of Jesus. Because you know what? When we do this in dedicated sincerity, there will be results. That's what God takes care of. So I could ask you to stand up. I could ask you to raise your hand. I could ask you to come forward. But what I want to ask you to do is, if you want to be a representative of Christ, if you want to dedicate yourself intentionally to be involved in the work of his kingdom this year, I want to encourage you to consider coming this afternoon to Downsview Church. That's a way that you can show and help yourself make a commitment to be involved in our plans to share our faith and the goodness of God's love with our community.